Welcome to Mental Health Now. My name is Kim McDevitt. I am the Executive Director of Mental Health America. Recently, the Surgeon General posted a rare warning about youth mental health. Today, we have invited experts to discuss youth mental health and what you can do to help. We have Dr. Amanda Ketcher, psychologist. We have Gretchen Gaudioso, family and child advocate and educator for Mental Health America of Lancaster County. And we have Ava Lichok, a student. We are excited to have this conversation about mental health and youth. Hopefully we can share some great education to the public about the importance of addressing mental health in youth. What would you say the most prominent concerns are right now facing children?
Wow, I think there's a lot of concern surrounding just the inconsistency of the last 2 years. I think there's been so many changes that it's hard to navigate sometimes, not knowing necessarily day to day what your day is going to look like. Will there be a reason that you're not allowed to go to school because of COVID or something along those lines? So I think that, and probably connection, is another piece that I've been concerned about in the individuals that I'm working with. Just seeing that some of the relationships and things that have been built up over time have been strained a little in the last 2 years, and that's definitely a concern in terms of mental health.
And can you share a little more about how the relationships have been strained or why they've been strained?
Yeah, I mean, in my opinion, from seeing with the people I'm working with, a lot of kids have had to be virtual or have had to be distanced from their peers. And I think that peers are a huge support for the kids that we're supporting. So for them to not have their network of people around them, I think it just creates a lot of risk. I also think that with the last 2 years, there's been a lack of safe adults getting to know kids the way that they used to. You know, for kids who have been virtual or who haven't been able to be around coaches, teachers, things like that, I think there's just been a lot fewer people knowing these teens and these kids too.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And Gretchen, you work in schools and you do mental health education in the community. What have you been seeing?
So I was agreeing with Dr. Kutcher, and I was thinking also that I think social media is a big problem for youth today, and you can probably talk a lot about this too, Ava. But like the certain look and the wanting to just like, oh, I need to have this many likes, and I think that is a lot of pressure. And one of the things that I talk to the teenagers about is the amount of pressure that they have. So someone might say to them like, oh my gosh, like what do you have to be stressed out about? You're in high school. It's like the easiest time of your life. No, it's not. And like the added stress and pressure is just tremendous, especially with COVID.
So that's interesting because you're sharing that social media impacts a child's mental health, but yet we're forcing our kids to be online for classes and schools. So Ava, what is your experience with increased technology usage, and how is that impacting your mental health?
So I spent majority of my year last year online up until about February, March, and then we were back in school every other day. So it was nice being online and being able to be on my own schedule, but when people were taking their families like private jets to like Cancun and like vacationing, and you're sitting in your bed doing your homework, running away and like the depression of a tan, like you're getting all this FOMO from like missing out. So I think that's where the social media aspect comes in. There's just this great FOMO, especially coming out of COVID. Everyone's traveling. A lot of parents don't have jobs anymore. Like they're struggling to find jobs still. So sitting there and financially struggling while others are like out living their best life, going to colleges that you weren't accepted into, like it just sucks sitting there watching that. And I think that's the problem with social media.
Developing new hobbies. I remember that at the beginning of the pandemic
Yeah.
too, like seeing like, oh, people are being so much more productive, or they're doing so much more exciting things, and I'm just trying to survive here. So I think it's generated a lot of that, what you're talking about, Eva, definitely.
And people don't write like, oh, like having a rough day. Well, some people do, let's be honest. But like, you know, people are usually bragging like, look at my family, how cute we are, ski bunnies on the slope. Where, you know, like people are like, why can't we be like that? My family goes to, you know, not me personally, but they might be thinking my family goes somewhere and we just fight. And, you know, and by the way, FOMO, for those that don't know, I know.
Fear of missing out.
Okay, there you go.
So how do Ava's here as a high school senior, sharing with us what she's seeing and what she's experiencing. How does it look different for elementary school students?
I think,
And what are you seeing?
yeah, I think a lot of it is the same, to be honest. I mean, I think
Interesting.
that in adolescents, in young kids, in teens, we're seeing a lot of anxiety. I think we're seeing an increase in depression. I think more kids are participating in self-harm or thoughts about self-harm than they have in previous years. And I think the research that we've seen recently supports that. We know that that's been an increase. So I think sometimes the difference, though, is that younger kids sometimes don't have the voice or the ability to be able to express themselves. And I think that's true sometimes for teens as well. Eva, I don't know if you're thinking of any peers of yours that
Yep.
might struggle with that, but, younger kids often have a harder time putting things into words and don't have as many opportunities to connect with safe adults, again, outside of their home. So.
Well, that's interesting too, because the Surgeon General said that emergency departments have seen an increase, 51% increase in adolescent girls who have had a suicidal attempt. But think about all the students that have suicidal ideation,
Absolutely.
and they're not able to reach out to someone to get that support. So. What would you say, what could we be doing to reduce stigma or talk about stigma, educating students, so that children normalize, or the conversation of mental health is more normalized?
Yeah, the number one thing that comes to mind for me is not panicking. I think a lot of times, especially when it comes to self-harm or things like that, as soon as we hear it, we worry, like, oh my gosh, this person is suicidal. They want to do something to take their life. That's not always the case. Self-harm can often be a coping strategy that we can identify other ways of helping them to be able to manage themselves a little bit more effectively. So I think staying calm and maintaining that openness and willingness to discuss some of these things so that kids know I can talk to an adult about this and they can handle it. It's not going to be too much or something that they've never heard of before. So I think that's extremely important. I think any opportunity that we have to have conversations about it, even modeling that for the individuals that we're working with, for us as adults and, high schoolers, to be able to say, this is what this experience has been like for me, here's how I'm getting through it, and model that for other people. So I think modeling and education is extremely important. Gretchen, I'm sure you probably have some thoughts on that too.
Oh, yeah. Well, excuse me. So I know that when I'm, and back to self-harm, I'm always amazed how many kids, when I say, how many of you know someone that is cutting or hurting themselves, and every single student raises their hand. There typically isn't one that's not. And then I know what I missed when we were talking, or when I was doing presentations via Zoom, is I like to look at people and look in their eyes and because you can tell the people that are struggling just by looking at them. And so I miss doing that, but I after I talk to a class and I'm talking about this, I'll say to the teacher, hey, the girl in third row is was tearing up. The other thing, I think it is important, I love what you said about it's important to teach the students what they need to say, how do you ask for help, what are the steps that you need to do. And I will say that to the students, what do you guys do if you're worried about a friend? And some of them are honest and say, well, I don't want to tattle on them. They don't probably use the word tattle, but I don't want to tell on them, but and I say, you're gonna save their life if you do. So
Gretchen, you talk about educating students in the classroom. Can you share with the audience what you do in schools?
So I go into health classes of all different ages, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, and also I've started going into elementary schools. We got a call from a school that had, I think it was 5 or 6, sixth graders that had talked about suicide. So they wanted to have us go in and talk to them. So I go in and I talk about the signs and symptoms of depression and anxiety, about suicide, about how to help themselves and how to help someone else.
Great. So, Ava, listening to Gretchen sharing the education session that she does in school, do you find that a lot of students don't have that education, and how might that be helpful to them?
Yeah, so I know in our school district specifically, we have not had someone come in and talk about it. We've had QPR training, but that was done my freshman year, so 3 years ago. So we haven't really done anything about mental health since, and I think it needs to be like a 6-month thing. Like, it needs to be a refresher, like every so often, because once you get through the weeks and past Christmas break, you forget what happens past that. It's a new year, you start off like strong, and then by February, you've just fallen back into old habits majority of the time. I know as a high schooler, that's normally what happens. So having someone come in and talk about mental health would definitely be a needed thing, and I know Chester County is in need of that.
And how might that have helped you personally?
So, I mean, personally, I know how to get in touch with people that need help and how to get them the help they need, but there's so many people that don't. So having you or someone like you come in and talk to us and give us these outlets outside of Chester County or down the road that we had no idea existed would really open us up, because we only know they only really talk about National Suicide Prevention Hotline and like a few other places, but those few other places are booked. Chester County is huge. So having other outlets out of the county that we can still get to in 45 minutes here, it would be perfect.
So you were a state golf champ, right? And you were on the
Wow.
homecoming court.
Yes.
And so, and you are a typical college student who was well liked and very successful. What were your struggles?
So, I want to say pre-pandemic, the struggle was adjusting after my 3rd week of high school, losing a friend to suicide. So it was my 3rd week of my first year of high school. I lost one of my really good friends who I went to elementary with, middle school. She was one of my friends. I lost her to suicide. So it was the weekend of my birthday. So my birthday was kind of a bum. But just adjusting out of that and then having to deal with another one and another one and another one. And you just like don't know what to say at that point. So I think that was like the hardest adjustment. And then coming out of the pandemic, we had no suicides during it. But last school year, on the tail end of it, like May, April, we did have a couple. So I think coming back out of that, it's like we've been through such a tough time already. Like, why is this still happening when we already went through the dark?
So you've had a lot of suicides in
Yeah,
your
it's
school.
been 8 or 9 in the school district.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah. So do you think that there are enough resources in the community to support mental health for youth?
I mean, generally speaking, I think access to services can be a challenge, especially right now in the midst of the pandemic. But I think the bigger thing is that we need to help educate young people in terms of making that first step to ask someone for help. You know, I think that there's still a lot of adults who work with kids who are afraid that they're going to put ideas in someone's head if they say, you know, if they're noticing things about someone and want to ask them, are you suicidal? Or are you having thoughts about hurting yourself? I think we're still dealing with some of those misconceptions too. So I think it's sort of educating teachers, coaches, parents in terms of what they're looking for if they think that their child is struggling, but also helping students know how to ask for help. Like you were saying, Gretchen, like how do we get them to know it's okay to go to someone and say, this is what I've been thinking, this is what I've been feeling, and someone will come to them.
And we've seen research that says our parents of our youth today understand the importance of mental health and the importance of mental health as much. It is as important. Mental health is as important as physical health, but they don't know what to say. They don't know what to do. They don't know where to go. So they are fearful of starting those conversations with their students. So how can parents become educated?
I think one of the major things is just being willing to have those conversations with other parents sometimes. Like, I think that you can speak to other parents, and a lot of people have gone through similar situations. I think when we're talking about parents, we have to recognize that there could be generations of families that haven't necessarily talked about mental health. So this is still pretty new for a lot of people. So I think using resources like MHA or others in the community to gain more information as to what access is out there is really important, but also just getting that comfort level of being willing to put yourself out there and have that conversation. You know, I remind parents all the time, you're not putting ideas in kids' heads. If you ask them, are you struggling? Is there something that is going on here? Like, we are just acknowledging it and validating that there's struggle happening. I think we also want to capitalize on strengths too. I think that that's really important. So looking at what are some of the strengths that these kids have and how can we incorporate that and build rapport and relationships surrounding that too.
Great. And Ava, did you feel supported at home and in school?
Definitely at home, but with the school, there's just so many kids, and it's harder to get in with guidance. They've gotten definitely a lot better after the pandemic and stuff like that, but pre-pandemic, when we were going through the suicide epidemic at school, it was definitely a lot harder. Everyone was getting slots if you were friends with her, but they actually didn't know who was friends with her. So they were pulling random kids that weren't actually friends with that person. So it got a little messed up in the system. So I think having like an attachment organization where you can meet with the counselor and then say, okay, well, you need to get in touch with this person and they'll be able to meet with you, rather than guidance having this whole entire burden, because they're carrying college and like mental health and all of that. So there either needs to be just guidance and college, or there just needs to be one and then has an attachment to the other.
Yeah, that's why we're seeing more and more school-based mental health
Yes.
in districts, particularly around here. That's one of the areas that I work in, and that's essentially having mental health professionals embedded in the school, so that if the counselor does screen someone and say, wow, there's things here that we think we can help you with, they can connect to that mental health service. So I think that's an attempt at trying to do what you're talking about.
Yeah, we do have 2 prevention specialists and we have like a board, but getting in with them, it's pretty simple. They have like a 30-second like getting them from that to that, but having just like the support groups, like we have some, but there's just not as many for how many kids, and it's like more like only if you're struggling you can go to these support groups, not just as like an open discussion like this. Like you're not having the open discussion,
Early
it's
intervention,
only
yeah.
if you're struggling.
Great.
Well, who in high school isn't struggling in some capacity? That's
Yeah,
what I'm
as
sitting
a
here. That's
senior.
what I'm sitting here thinking. Yeah.
So we will take a brief pause. When we return, we will look at what we can be doing better. Welcome back to Mental Health Now. Today we're focusing on mental health in youth. So in earlier conversation we discussed what mental health challenges students are facing today. We talked about middle schoolers, high schoolers, and youth. And we shared that we could be doing things better. So I'd like to hear from you experts, you panel of experts, on what we could be doing better. Is stigma prohibiting students from, or youth from, reaching out to ask for help?
Stigma? I would say stigma, but I think more people want to talk about it. It is great, and because I've been in the field for so long, to see how mental health has come along. The kids used to not want to talk to me. Now they'll talk to me afterwards. They don't care if they're seen talking to me. Where before it's like, oh, I don't want to be talking to the mental health lady. So I think that's that's a good part of it. To me, a lot of it is what you were talking about earlier, is the access to care, and I frequently will tell students, like, if you broke your leg, you know exactly what the care, what like the road's gonna probably look like. You're gonna have to go to the ER and da. So and then, but for mental health, if like someone's struggling, and I think this is true for parents too, like, where do I go first? Do I get a psychiatrist or a psychologist or a licensed social worker? It's the not knowing exactly what the steps are. And that's one of the things we do at MHA, is we help people navigate the system.
Yeah, and I would be interested, Ava, to know what you think. I mean, I definitely think that I see that teens especially sometimes feel like they need to deal with things on their own before they reach out for help. So where do you think about that? What do you think about that? Because I think that self-reliance thought is sometimes a struggle.
Yeah, the independence of like being a high schooler has definitely like taken a toll on this, but I mean, after what we had been through as a school district, it had definitely become such an open like conversation. As you would say, like a lot of people wouldn't like want to go and like talk about it. Like it was like a weird thing to talk about. Then it happens once and everyone's like, okay, we need to talk about this. And I think it's almost like the stigma of parents being like, that's not my child. That's what I had talked about earlier. There's this fear of like, oh, my child would never do that. And I think that's what stops like the parent to parent conversation is parents are like, oh, my child would never do that, when they actually know their kid is talking about that with their kid. And they're like, they're actually struggling, and that parent won't know and will never know that until it's too late.
So what are the signs and symptoms? What should parents and educators be looking for?
Yeah, I think anytime there's a change in behavior, anytime, whether that's change in appetite, someone's not sleeping, whether they're suddenly isolating themselves away from other people when usually they would have been social. Certainly in an educational setting, if you're seeing someone's grades or performance is different than what it was, and everybody has a unique school performance, so that's not to say that everyone's going to have an A or something like that, but if your child is, something's different, you want to be paying attention to that. Definitely wanting to have an eye on who your child is spending time with, making sure you know who they're with, making sure you have a sense of what they're accessing online. If there's things, and it could be positive or negative. I mean, I definitely have worked with kids that have been Googling, what do I do if I'm suicidal? So sometimes it's just knowing what they're looking up and who they're connecting with that I think is really important. But any change in behavior should be a signal that there needs to be a conversation or a check-in.
That's great. And who can parents turn to? You mentioned Mental Health America as a place that behavioral health and mental health system is a very complicated system. So Mental Health America offers the service of navigation and education, and also financial support. Is that right, Gretchen?
For counseling, yeah. We're offering 3 free counseling sessions as a part of a grant that we received from the Steinman Foundation. So I would also say maybe sometimes a good starting point is with your family doctor, so they can tell you kind of where, they can suggest where you can go as well.
Yeah, and I would definitely encourage parents, family doctors they're capable of handling those conversations, to at least get the door open and start to identify some resources. So sometimes parents will be nervous about bringing that up, but honestly, they're probably the professionals who know you the best at this point. So for them to be able to open that conversation can be really helpful.
I like the idea of modeling, so having the parents be transparent and honest about the challenges that they face, and educators as well. So what do you think parents can do at home to support their child who might be struggling?
Yeah, Ava, what have your experiences been?
So my parents at home have definitely, whenever there's an adjustment in behavior, like we were saying, they're always, are you feeling okay? Are you sick? Do you need a day? Like, my parents are firm believers in mental health days, and we normally take them like once a month, like to reevaluate, reflect if it's needed. But mainly just being at home during the pandemic, we did a lot of things. There began to be an open communication my freshman year when the first suicide happened. My mom sat me down and it became like this huge conversation, and she was almost like terrified to have the conversation with me because she didn't want me to be afraid to talk about it. Yeah. But I was like, there's no problem talking about it. I think that's the struggle with parents, is they don't know if the kids can handle this conversation when we're already having it on social media, we're already having it in school. Like, they don't know what goes on daily on our phones or at school. So having the conversation at home isn't going to be half as hard as it actually is.
Yeah, from a very young age, kids can have these conversations.
Yeah.
More often than not, when I sit down with kids and talk to them about feelings and emotions, they can identify a lot of things that have contributed to the way that they're feeling today from a very young age. So I think for parents just to recognize that there is no wrong age to start talking about mental health. There's no wrong age to model that for your kids, how to ask for help, how to engage with others surrounding your mental health.
And I will say, having parents be raw with their kids, like, oh, I've had a tough day, I need a mental health day. Like, having that open conversation has done nothing but, like, make your child want to have more of a conversation with you about how they're feeling.
For sure.
This is a very important conversation. Do you have any parting thoughts?
I think for me, it's just let's continue the conversation. Whatever that looks like, it doesn't matter if it's pretty, it doesn't matter if the words come out the right way. Let's just keep talking about it, I think is what I would say.
Great. Gretchen?
I agree, and I think like sometimes a show like this is an easy start to a conversation. Hey, I saw this show tonight, and that's a great conversation starter.
My biggest thing would just be, don't be afraid to talk to your kids.
Well, thank you for joining us today. I'm Kim McDevitt with Mental Health Now. Thank you for joining us today. We need to keep talking about mental health.